Thank you very much. We do have a major accident on 9 North. That's why people will be coming in a little bit late today. We are full here this morning, but anybody coming up from the lower valley, appreciate people getting here as best as they can today. Gives me a great honor now to introduce our chairman of the chamber, who's done a terrific job this year. We've had an outstanding year in both membership, our events, activities. Vin Capice.
Thanks, Larry. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to first thank our sponsor this morning, the Mohegan Tribe. I'd also like to thank Senator Murphy for being here. At your desk, you have a sheet which lists all the state and local officials that are here today, and I'd like to recognize all of them. I'd also like to recognize we have one new member this morning, Solar City. If anybody's here from Solar City, if you can stand up and be recognized. I guess they're not here, but why don't we give them a round of applause anyway? Okay, have a great day. Thank you.
Also, as I mentioned before, the Disabled American Veterans Chapter 7 in Middletown are planning to raise money for a memorial at the Veterans Memorial Green located at Washington Street. So make sure you stop by their booth as you leave here today. I know I'll be saying some things about Kevin Brown in a second, but I personally want to thank Chuck Bunnell for everything that he's done for me personally over a long period of time. He's been a long-time friend. Also, he's on the Board of Trustees of the University of Connecticut, and I know he does a great job for the Mohegan Tribe. So, Chuck, thank you for everything, and thank you for many, many years of friendship. We have also with us here today Robert Hinton and Joshua Hawks Lads, who presented our first Niagara February breakfast, the do's and don'ts of hiring and firing. It was another sold-out event. Are they with us? Did they get here today? If they are, I'd like to have them stand. Thank you very much. Really appreciate a great job. And John Lamartra, let's have a round of applause for John. He played the piano today for us. We're really fortunate here in Middlesex County to be working with the Workforce Alliance Board, which is based out of New Haven, but really are in 30 towns throughout South Central Connecticut and Middlesex County. They have a fantastic leader in Bill Villano. And for somebody that's been involved in workforce issues for a long time, and at one time we had one in our region with New Britain and Meriden, and then we merged down to New Haven. I can tell you that merger has been outstanding for us. They have many, many programs. They are the chief funder of our youth program. And I know some people in here have gotten letters from us to fund our youth program again next year. As you know, we have almost 100 students in employment during the summer, which is very important. And of course, the city of Middletown stepped up big in this. And also, we have a program now with them that Lorenzo Marshall from our office does with a job-seeking and employer outreach program here in Middlesex County. So, Bill, can you stand and be recognized? I think you got some of your guys with you, but thank you for everything. And we are getting very, very close to August. Very close to August. So with this time coming up, it is great to introduce Nathan Grube.
Thank you, Larry. We are going to celebrate, first of all, Senator, thank you for being here very much this morning. 10 years this summer of Travelers as title sponsor of the Travelers Championship. It's amazing to think about. But this August, we will be playing our 10th year, and 500 plus charities, more than $10 million back to charities in this community, more than $300 million of economic impact during this last decade. It's been pretty amazing. Travelers, we wouldn't be able to be here without Travelers, but I want to say something here. We wouldn't be able to be here without Jay Fishman, the CEO of Travelers, who really steered the vision for Travelers supporting this tournament over the last 10 years. The energy and resources that he dedicated to the title sponsorship of this event We wouldn't be here without him. And many of you have heard Jay's recent diagnosis with ALS last year. He stepped down as CEO, still staying on as executive chairman of the Travelers, but he stepped down as CEO. And I want to say this because we talk about all the charities that we support and the different causes that benefit from the tournament. When Jay was diagnosed, he came out very publicly and said, I have two choices. I can either think that I'm being punished for something I did in a former life, or I can take the platform that I've been given and do something with the resources that I have to make a significant difference in the fight against ALS. And he was very public about that, and we as a tournament took a step back, and our primary beneficiary has been the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp in Connecticut. It's an amazing charity. They do some phenomenal work. And when Jay came out and came very public with what he was fighting, we sat down with Hole in the Wall Gang Camp and said, how would you feel if for 2016 the primary beneficiary and the focus was around ALS? And they could not have been more supportive. They said, you should do that. That's the right thing to do. We want to be supportive. Being your primary beneficiary the last decade, we know what that does for a charity and for a cause, so we're supportive of that. So we're going to have a focus on ALS this year for 2016 on two fronts, research and patient care. And research, we're going to hold a dinner on Friday night with Tom Watson, John Feinstein, and Jay Fishman is going to be present. And we're going to raise money for the Bruce Edwards Foundation that raises money for research against the fight against ALS. And Bruce is a native of Wethersfield, Connecticut, caddy on the PGA Tour. It should be a very special evening. And then on the patient care side, we have partnered with the Hospital for Special Care. They see, I think, almost every patient in Connecticut that suffers from this disease. We are going to raise money for them. We're going to raise awareness for them. And when we came out with this initiative, we had a partner of ours, Mahoney and Sable, step right up and they said, we want to do something for this and about this, what can we do? And they're going to sponsor our 5K road race this year, where all the money is going to go to Hospital for Special Care. So you're going to see a big push from the tournament on those two fronts, research and patient care, for a very special reason. Obviously with Jay's diagnosis, it's going to be a pretty special year for us. But I wanted to make everybody aware of this. You're part of this event. We're all partners together. And I wanted to let you know what was going on. So we're going to do something pretty neat this year. We're excited about it. More player updates, band updates, all that stuff, that's coming in the next 153 days, I promise. But I wanted to make everybody aware of that new initiative this year. So thank you very much for your support, and we will see you very, very soon.
And a speaker update for our breakfast?
I'll talk to you about that after.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. I just want to also now introduce the people at the head table that will not be speaking. We have with us Kevin Lembo, our controller. And as you know, Kevin is a very special friend of the Middlesex County Chamber of Commerce. He travels throughout our divisions. I think he's just done a fantastic job as the controller in the state of Connecticut. He has been upfront on so many issues, and I'm very proud of him, of not only helping our chamber, but more importantly, what he does for the citizens of the state of Connecticut. Let's have a special round of applause for Kevin. Also, we have Anna Wasessa, the president of Middlesex Community College, the best community college in the state of Connecticut. And Ann Evans, the energizer person of the state of Connecticut for economics. She just does a tremendous job representing the federal government from the United States Department of Commerce. She is all over the place, and I appreciate everything that she's done. And now it gives me a great honor to get Jay Warren up here.
Good morning. My name is Jay Warren. I'm the Assistant Fire Chief with the Middletown Fire Department and President of the Middletown Road Race. Last July, the City of Middletown hosts a 5K road race each July, and we had a record number of runners this year, 600 runners, and we were able to give donations to 8 local charities. One I'm here today to present to Larry and the Chamber of Commerce for their mentorship program. It was a very successful year. We hope to do the same thing again this year. If anyone is not busy on July 20th and you'd like to run 2 laps around Middletown up a couple hills in the humidity, feel free. And so without further ado, I'd like to present Larry. We have a $3,500 check to the Middletown Mentorship Program.
Mayor Drew will be getting up right now, and this is a very special, I think a very special day for all of us here in Middlesex County and members of the Chamber. We have a student at the University of Connecticut, Medea Shafkat, who also is from Middletown High. And if you can just dial back to January of this year, and in your program, there's a picture, it was on the front page of the second section of the paper. And it was unbelievable. And I wanted to do something special for this very, very special young lady. I got some material from Middletown High. And in Middletown High, she was an honor student, active in all the activities. The University of Connecticut, honor student, almost a 4-point average, active in numerous activities. But more important, as I talked to Mayor Drew about, that we have a young lady here that was willing to stand tall and to get her views out to people about being inclusive and the importance of this. Middlesex County is special because we are. And it is special because we have people like Medea. So it gives me a great honor now to introduce the Mayor of the City of Middletown, Dan Drew, for special recognition.
Thank you, Coach. Senator Murphy, Comptroller Lembo, Chairman Capice, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here this morning. Senator Murphy, in particular, it's always wonderful to have you here, and we're very excited to hear from you. Coach, thank you for that introduction of an extraordinary young woman who has done a great deal to make our community proud and to stand tall. And to stand up for the values ensconced in our nation's founding documents. Because in a time when fear is prevalent, there are people who prey on that fear to divide us. There are people who prey on that fear to marginalize some people in our society. And more encouragingly and more importantly, there are people, and Medea is a strong example of one of them, who are willing to stand up and lend their voices and say, that's not the American way to behave. It's not the right thing to do. And most fundamentally, it's not the moral thing to do. It takes courage. It takes bravery. And for Medea to stand up the way she stood up, for her to call out that irresponsible behavior, and then not just to condemn bad behavior, but to stand tall for what's right and for what is morally righteous, says a lot about her character, but it's also a reflection of all of us, because she stands as a shining example of everything that's right about the United States of America, and we're very proud of you for doing it. Her parents are here today with us, Nuzat Ullah and Shafkat Ullah, and if you'd like to stand, we'd like to recognize you as well. You raised an incredible young woman. And Medea's high school principal, Colleen Weiner, is back here as well. Colleen, why don't you stand up real quick? So Medea, we are very proud of you in the city of Middletown for your academic accomplishments, for your substantive accomplishments, and everything that you've done outside of the classroom at the University of Connecticut. We were speaking beforehand, and I found out that Medea works and writes for the student newspaper at UConn, which I did when I was there, and my friend Jason Jakubowski right there did as well. And you know, most importantly, though, Medea, your voice is a strong voice. It's a voice that's set an example for the entire state of Connecticut, and you are a leader who is standing for all the right things. And I am very proud to proclaim today, Monday, February 29th, 2016, as Medea Shafkat Day in the city of Middletown. Come on up here and get this, and congratulations.
It's great to see that my community is so great, and I'm really glad to be part of Middletown, so thank you so much.
I know Senator Murphy will probably mention this, but she did an internship in his office, so I know that he's very proud also of this. Well, it gives me a great honor now to introduce Kevin Brown. Kevin has been active with our chamber in the fact that every year he comes to a lot of our events, but he's active with our Support the Troops, Honor the Veterans group. He's been to that function every year. The Mohegan Tribe is very, very fortunate to have an individual such as Kevin Brown as their chairman. Kevin Brown is known as Red Eagle. Also, before he became chairman of the Mohegan Tribe Council, he had a 25-year career in the United States Army with extensive leadership and organizational management in both combat and non-combat environments. He was also the head or stateside management of Fort Riley, the Fort Riley base in Kansas, and that was like being a Tony Salvatore town manager of a town of about 55,000 people. But more importantly to me, he leads the Mohegan Tribe that is always given back to our region and our community. They are excellent corporate citizens. And that's why with Medea being here today and Kevin, it's so important because both of them are examples to what's good about our great country. Kevin, thank you for your support, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your friendship. I give you Kevin Brown.
Thank you, Larry. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Mohegan Tribe, I'm pleased to be here this morning, both as the sponsor of this morning's breakfast and to introduce our guest speaker, Senator Christopher Murphy. Senator Murphy has a long history of service, public service here in the Connecticut General Assembly, where he spent 4 years representing Southington in the 81st House District, and then another 4 years representing the 16th Senatorial District. In 2006, Chris challenged longtime incumbent Nancy Johnson and won a hard-fought grassroots campaign, even taking the city of New Britain. Then in 2012, with a vacancy created by the retirement of Senator Joe Lieberman, Chris went on to defeat Republican candidate Linda McMahon in the general election to become the junior senator for the state of Connecticut. Chris is a firm believer in keeping jobs in the United States. He founded the Buy American Caucus, which is a bipartisan congressional group dedicated to ensuring that U.S. industrial policy incentives incentivizes companies to create jobs here at home. He also profiles and promotes manufacturers with Murphy's Monday Manufacturer. In order to protect and grow jobs here in Connecticut, something that many of you know I've been very involved in myself with our MMCT venture, despite the fact that I now know how to say Annyeong Haseyo as well, because of our Korean venture. Chris has introduced 2 pieces of legislation aimed at strengthening existing standards and prioritizing the purchase of American-made goods, the 21st Century Buy American Act and the American Jobs Matter Act. As representatives of Connecticut's business community, we know that we're fortunate to have such a strong voice in Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming your guest speaker, Senator Chris Murphy.
everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me back. It seems as if every time I am here, it's the breakfast right before you're going to hear from Gino Auriemma or Kevin Ollie or somebody that people really want to hear much more than me. I want to be, and it's great that it's a full crowd, but like one of these days I want to be like the breakfast right before somebody nobody wants to hear, like John Larson or somebody like that. So don't just keep that to yourselves. That I was trying to think of like which one of them could I use that wouldn't be offended by that joke. And so great to be here with you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about Medea, who's very special to us in our office. She spent a good part of her last academic year with us at a frankly pretty amazing time for her to be in our office. But I also want to thank my great friend Kevin for sponsoring today's breakfast. I want to congratulate him on a really amazing new venture, a new opportunity for the Mohegan to spread its wings into new markets, to be competitive globally in the way that we want all Connecticut ventures to be. And it's just really wonderful to share a morning and to share a stage with Mohegan. Larry, of course, has been a great friend. This is just a stop that all of us love, and every time we get an invite, we jump at the opportunity. And so this isn't just an amazing convening for people on the private and public sector side. Larry and his team are obviously go-tos for us. And so I really want to talk a lot about the Buy American cause today, but in developing a lot of that agenda, which is making progress, the idea that we should be using taxpayer dollars to incentivize purchasing from U.S. companies, not foreign companies. A lot of that work comes from key connections that Larry and Ann have helped to make for our office. So I thank them for being such great friends, supporters, and counsel for us. When I've had the opportunity a few times before to come here and give a talk, I've tried to have one theme, one subject that I hit upon, but I really sort of struggled to come up with that one thing today to talk about, given all of the different topics that are in the news. So I'm going to ask you to forgive me a little bit, and obviously I'll leave time for question and answer, because I want to skip around a little bit this morning. I want to try to cover a little bit of the landscape when it comes to issues that matter to Connecticut, some issues that are going to be in the news, I think, later this year, and then some issues that are of top of mind right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some good economic news for Connecticut when it comes to defense manufacturing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the agenda for the rest of the year in Washington, one specific issue that I think might be able to get bipartisan consensus. That's the issue of mental health reform and addiction reform, really important given the opioid crisis here in Connecticut. And then I want to talk a little bit about the news that's gripped the Senate for the last week, and that is the vacancy on the Supreme Court, because I think that bears some discussion this morning. And then I'll finish by just talking about my affection for Medea and the work that she's done. So, amidst all of the hand-wringing, and it's rightful hand-wringing in this state that's happened over the departure of General Electric's corporate headquarters, it's frankly disconcerting that that departure has gotten about 10 times the amount of attention than another announcement that was made within weeks. That is Electric Boat's decision to hire 1,500 workers, 8 times the number that are leaving in Fairfield on their southeastern campus. That's 1,500 hires. Given attrition, that'll be about 800 net new workers, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. That doesn't even speak to the fact that there are 500 EB suppliers all over the state, not just in southeastern Connecticut, right here in Middlesex County, that are going to be the beneficiary of that work. Now, we're a small legislative delegation. There's only 7 of us. with Rosa. People sometimes feel that there's like 15 of us, but there's only 7 of us, and we kind of feel that we have been able, especially in the defense budget, to punch a little bit above our weight class because we have seen some major victories for this state when it comes to sub-production, engine production, and helicopter production. So in this last budget, we were able to secure a $40 billion Navy commitment for submarines over the next 5 years. This is an exceptional moment where, thanks to the pioneering work of Joe Courtney and Chris Dodd and Joe Lieberman, we are building 2 of these Virginia-class submarines every year. But we are now just a handful of years away from building what are called the Ohio replacement-class submarines. These are the big ballistic missile submarines. We're doing an enormous amount of work getting ready to build them on the engineering side. That's part of the reason you're seeing this ramp up. But once we start building Ohio replacement class submarines, and that doesn't happen for another 5 or 6 years, those suckers involve 2.5 times the labor and the workforce need than the Virginia class submarine does. So what you're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. 800 jobs net this year, but you're talking about thousands of net jobs being added to the Connecticut economy. Thousands of jobs being added to the Connecticut economy in the years to come. And that doesn't even speak to what's happening, as you know, right here in Middletown at Pratt & Whitney, what's happening in East Hartford. Now, we were able to add about a dozen new F-35s above the president's request, which is not something that normally happens in the budget this year for F-35s. We believe in that program. It's not back on schedule. It's just, again, the beginning of the ramp up. Pratt just signed a contract for 167 F-35s, but the ramp up on purchasing means that there's going to be more and more work. But we just did a big event up in East Hartford at Pratt celebrating the fact that the real news at Pratt is not the military purchasing, but what's happening on the private sector side. The geared turbofan right now is being celebrated in the aerospace world, and the private purchasing that's going to happen is going to dwarf the military purchasing. And so there's really fantastic word for Pratt and all its suppliers. And as someone who does visit manufacturers all the time in Connecticut, listen, there are still many that are struggling. I don't deny that this tsunami of aerospace and undersea warfare work, I don't deny that it hasn't touched everyone, but there are more new buildings being built and more new capacity being built to manufacturing in Connecticut than any time before in my political lifetime. And that is in part due to the commitment that we've been able to make in military purchasing at Pratt. Now, Sikorsky is, of course, in a new place today with new ownership. We think that's important. We think it was time for Sikorsky to have ownership that is going to maybe take a new look at some of the investments that can be made in that plant. There, the news is not as good from the American military purchasing side because there's been a long scheduled ramp down of blackdown purchases happening there. The great news is that on the foreign sales side, we're seeing some real increases. And so the Polish government, which had made a decision to buy a European helicopter, a big purchase order just about a month ago at my urging, decided to scrap that purchase order and is now in negotiations with Sikorsky. We have many other announcements about to be made for foreign purchases of Sikorsky helicopters. The reason that I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee, in addition to the Appropriations Committee, is because if you want to represent these companies, you can't just be fighting for money in the appropriations budget. You have to be out in the world representing our companies in the work that they're going to win from foreign governments. And I think for Sikorsky, that's going to be a lot of the future as well. Similarly, the supply chain for Sikorsky is all over Middlesex County. So the last time I was here, I tried to present a little bit rosier picture of the American economy than you might believe if you're watching MSNBC and CNN and Fox News on a nightly basis, if you're just looking at the headlines about companies leaving Connecticut and not paying attention to all the companies that are coming here. And that's true for the United States at large. But I want to talk about a couple other subjects this morning, but that's an important one. The military work coming to the state of Connecticut is at unprecedented levels and are going to be creating thousands of jobs here. So that's looking backwards as to what we did in the appropriations budget that's going to be good for Connecticut. I want to talk a little bit about the agenda moving forward. I spent yesterday afternoon at Rushford, just down the street here in Middletown, talking with some of the clients that are there struggling to overcome heroin addictions. We know that the rate of deaths from opioid abuse from heroin overdose is twice that as it was just a handful of years ago. We know the lives that are being ruined, the damage to our economy that comes with this addiction and disease, but also all of the money that we are spending on the back end of treatment that we could be spending on the front end of a lot of other important programming. And I think we have a chance this year in the United States Congress to pass a bill that attacks both this addiction crisis, but also the broader mental health epidemic that's gripping this country. We've lost 4,000 inpatient mental health beds in the United States since the recession began, not as many of them here in Connecticut. We have less providers, not more providers on the outpatient side that are available to treat people with addiction and mental health as the number of kids just skyrockets that are suffering from addiction or suffering from mental illness. We still have just a tiny handful of adolescent psychologists and psychiatrists who are treating those kids. And so I've decided to make this particular issue my mission, especially on the mental health crisis. And many of you have been great to host me. Middlesex is where I went actually to announce the bill that we are now debating in the Health Committee because of some of the great work that they've done around what we call CCT teams, which are these innovative, holistic healthcare teams that go in and kind of rescue people who are in mental health crisis. I got together with a guy named Bill Cassidy, who's a conservative Republican from Louisiana, from the Deep South, and he and I built a coalition of 8 Republicans and 8 Democratic senators to introduce the Mental Health Reform Act, which is the first comprehensive mental health reform legislation that's been introduced in the Senate in my time in being in the United States Congress. We have a complementary bill introduced by a psychologist, my namesake, Tim Murphy, a congressman from Pennsylvania, and we are in the final stages of negotiating this bill out of the committee that I sit on, the Health Committee. It is one of the few truly bipartisan bills that might be able to make it to the floor in an election year. I won't go into the deep details of it, but it's about putting more resources so that into the system so that we can get more inpatient mental health and addiction beds, that we can have more providers. It's about coordinating systems together so that the physical healthcare system is talking to the mental health care system. Here's 2 amazing statistics for you. Somebody with a mental health diagnosis on average dies 20 years earlier than someone without a mental health diagnosis. Now, they don't die from their mental health diagnosis, but because of the comorbidities that happen, they often die from untreated physical illness. Here's another one for you. If you're a diabetes patient, that diagnosis alone doesn't put you in the top 5% of healthcare spenders in this country. What does is if you have a diabetes diagnosis and a depression diagnosis, just a simple depression diagnosis, not a bipolar diagnosis, but that then puts you in the top 5% of spenders that we all pay for. So if you're treating mental health, you're keeping people alive, but you're also saving us an enormous amount of money. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to vote on this bill in the Health Committee, possibly next week or the week after, get it to the floor, and it be one of the few victories that we may be able to have on a bipartisan basis. As you know, from my Buy American work to the mental health work to a lot of the work I do on foreign policy, I've tried to make everything I do done with bipartisan support. But it's going to be difficult to get this measure across to the finish line. And it has been made much more difficult by the announcement about a week ago that the Senate is not going to move forward on a Supreme Court nominee. And I want to spend a couple of minutes on that, and it'll lead into my just remarks about Medea. So this is extraordinary. It's extraordinary that several hours after the death of Justice Scalia, the leader of the United States Senate announced that with nearly 320 days remaining on a president's term, that the United States Senate, for the first time in our history, is not going to even begin a confirmation process. There have been 17 justices to the Supreme Court that have been confirmed during an election year. Not since the Civil War has the Supreme Court gone that long, over a year, as it would be by the time a new justice was confirmed, with 8 justices. The average time that it takes from announcement of a nominee to confirmation has been 67 days. This would be 300 plus days, because we don't know when the next appointment would be made. It would paralyze the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, that is a place in which there are often 4-4 decisions. Justice would be denied for literally millions of people across this country, and a new standard that would be set that I don't know how we return from. If you deny the legitimacy of a president for his final year in office, 25% of his elected term, what is the natural, reasonable end of that precedent? If a president isn't legitimate for his last year in office, why is he legitimate for his last 2 years, his last 3 years, his last 4 years? Why is there something special about the final 25% of his term? Now, I'm not saying that Democrats are going to respond in a tit-for-tat manner, but once you sort of tread into this territory, I don't know how you go back. There has always been a precedent that no matter what the parties of the president, that the Senate took a Supreme Court nominee seriously. Even somebody like Clarence Thomas was allowed by a Democratic Senate to proceed without a filibuster to a final vote. There's always been an understanding that the Judiciary Committee would move every nominee to the Senate floor. And there has been no nominee in the history of this country who, while pending, has not received a vote during the president's term. And to me, this is certainly about upholding the Constitution. This is about a faithfulness to the underlying document of our country. But it's also about a fight to stop everything from being political. Not everything in this country is just about presidential or congressional politics. There have to be some things that rise above the give and take of Republicans battering Democrats and Democrats battering Republicans. And the simple function of nominating and putting people on the Supreme Court has to be one of those things. Now, I give it the fact that a lot of Republicans eventually might want to vote against the person that the president puts up. They might not think that that person is suitable to be on the Supreme Court, and I reserve the right to vote against a nominee that a Democrat or Republican president puts up that I think is unsuitable either. But the idea that we wouldn't even meet with that person, we wouldn't even hold hearings, suggests that everything now has just become part of the political give and take, and there's nothing that we just accept as our responsibility as office holders. And I use that as a means to finally talk a little bit about Media's heroism. We have a leading nominee for the United States presidency who said this weekend that he refuses to condemn the KKK or its leader. Several months before, he proposed that the United States shut its doors to anyone of Muslim faith. And many political commentators just analyze this as if it's just a political ploy. Some people yesterday said that Trump's refusal to denounce the KKK was smart politics because 20% of his voters don't believe that the Emancipation Proclamation was rightful law, and so he's got to recognize who his base is. Not everything is political. Not everything has a political explanation. There still is right and wrong in this world. And our inability to roundly denounce this kind of overt play to racism says something, I think, really rotten about our political dialogue. And at the same time that you can feel bad about our inability to do that, you can feel really great about who we are in Connecticut, the fact that I don't think we will fall victim to those traps, and to the fact that we have people like Medea who are willing to stand up to that kind of rhetoric, and chambers like the Middlesex chamber who are willing to celebrate her decision. Let me tell you about when Medea was working in our office. Medea was an intern in our office, and what interns do in our office is answer the phones, right? So they answer the phones and they talk to everyone who calls. Medea was an intern in our office during the time of the bombings in Paris. Medea was an intern in our office when that candidate went on the air and said that no Muslims should be able to come to the United States. And while she did pick up a lot of calls from people who were very angry about that proposal and who were very supportive of our policy of inclusion in this state, she picked up the phone to a lot of people who had some pretty terrible things to say about her community. And we gave her the opportunity to stand down, to do other work in the office, because we just didn't know whether she would be able to handle that. But she wanted to take those calls. She wanted to take the time to walk constituents through the argument that she made in that wonderful Hartford Courant op-ed. And it's a reminder of the heroism that really exists in the Muslim community in this state. Their unwillingness to move into the background at a time of challenge, at a time of trouble, and at a time of turmoil. And it's really exceptional that amongst those leaders is a college student who didn't have to do what she did, but through her work and through this amazing op-ed that I've heard so much about, is allowing a conversation to happen that might not have otherwise. Not everything is political. Not everything can be analyzed just as whether it's good for this party or whether it's good for another party. Constitutional responsibilities aren't political. Our commitment to inclusiveness, our ability to remember that the foundation of this country is based on people fleeing religious persecution and coming to a country in which they can practice whatever religion they believe. That's not political either. Those are things that we get here in Connecticut. Those are things that we get in Connecticut because we have chambers like this that are willing to celebrate those traditions. And along with the fact that we are doing better than some people think when it comes to jobs in this state, especially on the military side, along with the fact that we might not be stuck in inaction this year in the Senate. We might actually be able to pass a great mental health and addiction bill that'll matter here. Along with those things, Medea and the Chamber's recognition of her is what reminds me why I am so honored to be able to be United States Senator from this great state. Thank you very much for having me here this morning.
Do you have time for a few questions?
I guess we got time for a few questions, so feel free to ask questions on any of these topics or anything else. How I'm going to apologize to John Larson for that joke. I'm happy to answer that. So, there we go.
Or I can just talk like this. Good morning, Senator. Thank you for coming. My name is Megan LaFountain. I'm an immigration lawyer in Middletown. And most of my clients are asylum seekers. I have women who have fled very serious domestic violence in South America. I have children who have fled gang violence. I've got a young girl, a 14-year-old from El Salvador, who every time she starts to tell me about witnessing her family killed by machete, attacked by the gangs, she starts to break down. She can't even continue the conversation. I have people who have fled political persecution, religious persecution, and they come and they sit in my office, and the current presidential campaign we have a candidate seriously affects their ability to stay here and the ability of many people to stay here. It's a very difficult conversation that we have with my clients to tell them that things could change dramatically that affect their lives and their futures in the U.S. What can I tell them to give them faith that they can still be safe here and that we can protect them?
Well, thank you for your work. Thank you for the question. Listen, I think especially here in Connecticut, right, we've made a commitment to being part of the resettlement process, and we have a political leadership from the governor to Comptroller Lembo, to our state legislative delegation, who are committed to, welcoming refugees that are fleeing persecution and violence with open arms. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be some individuals in our state, as there are anywhere, who will, hold certain prejudices. But I do think that those individuals are absolutely safe here, in part because, we don't use the rhetoric here that other states may be used to, and so we don't give license to those that might do something silly based on unjustifiable prejudices. They should also know that the president has made a commitment to bringing more individuals here who are fleeing violence, whether it be in Central America or in the Middle East. And I didn't talk a lot about foreign relations today. As many of you know, as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, I spend a lot of time working on this issue. But I will very briefly make the case for why resettlement of refugees, especially from the Middle East, matters when it comes to our fight against ISIS. So I was in the Middle East in the fall of last year, just about 4 months ago, and they told me there what they tell me when they visit Washington, which is that they don't believe that the United States is a true partner in fighting ISIS if we aren't also a partner in trying to address the humanitarian crisis that results from the destruction that ISIS perpetuates inside places like Syria and Iraq. Europe right now, as the weather warms, is getting ready for another flood of millions of refugees. And our partners in Europe and our partners in the Middle East, who are taking in millions and millions of refugees, a country like Jordan, one of our most important allies, fragile already, has 1.5 million Syrian refugees. Well, the United States applauds itself because next year we're going to take 10,000. During the Vietnam War, during the Bosnian War, we were taking millions of refugees from those countries, and yet we have basically shut our doors. We have the tightest screening process for any visitor or immigrant to this country in the refugee resettlement program. We only take the worst of the worst. We only take those individuals who can't survive in refugee camps and who need to be in the United States because they are so in danger, they have been so abused, tortured, etc. And our real vulnerabilities, I think we are doing a good job of addressing. I mean, some of our real vulnerabilities exist from the broader immigration program, in which you can come here from Europe without a serious security check. We know that there are European citizens who are amongst those who plotted the attacks on Paris. Well, at the end of last year, we passed a reform of our visa waiver program, which is that program that allows people to come from countries in Europe here without high-level security screens, and we added some really important protections to that program. So we're addressing our real vulnerabilities. We're continually making our refugee screening program better. But if we want to fight this vicious enemy, which is ISIS, and I believe we have to fight them with everything we got, then we need to be part of this refugee resettlement program in a way that we simply aren't today.
Chris, just a quick question. We spoke about the Supreme Court battle. I'm just surprised. We said everything is political in Washington, but to me it makes bad political sense to not even bring it to a vote. I mean, they can bring it to a vote and then they can defeat whoever they want. Is there an explanation or a rationale why immediately they said we're not going to vote on any candidate for the year? I don't really understand the political rationale.
So neither do I. So the question is, what's the political rationale for why the Republicans have made the decision not to even allow for a process to take place? And I think all of us have been asking ourselves the same question. I think a lot of Republicans in the Senate have been asking that question. Remember, they are right now saying not just that they won't have a vote on the Senate floor, not just that they won't have confirmation hearings, but they won't meet with the nominees. So they're not even going to acknowledge the nominees' existence. And I don't think that squares with where the American public are. Again, I think that people in Connecticut might disagree with a vote against a nominee, but they certainly understand that it's the prerogative of any senator to vote no. And there have certainly been confirmation fights that have gone a few rounds in the past. Everybody uses the example of Kennedy, who was confirmed in an election year, but of course Reagan had Justice Bork voted down. He had another Justice Ginsburg who had to withdraw. So there have been long confirmation fights, but they generally haven't been because of this obstinance. No, I think that I think people are really tired of this sort of political obstruction of the process. I think that shutdown went horribly for all of us, even those of us who had nothing to do with it. But it particularly weighed on the leadership at the time in the Senate and the House. And I think as time goes on, and people watch this nominee walking around the Senate, knocking on senators' doors, and having being turned away, which will just look so insulting, will look so demeaning to this nominee and to the president, that they'll begin to start allowing the process to move forward. So I'm sort of in the camp of those who thinks that at some point they will have to give and begin this confirmation process. Maybe it won't end up in somebody being confirmed. It'll be interesting to see who the president nominates, right? So one of the sort of initial names floated was Brian Sandoval, who's the Republican governor of Nevada, somebody who's a moderate Republican, but holds a lot of pretty solid foundational Republican conservative views. If it's somebody like that, then it'll make it a little bit harder for there to be a complete block on the process moving forward. And again, my fear is just that this thing descends. This is just the beginning, right? So if this happens the way it looks like McConnell wants it to happen, I worry about the precedent that it sets, and we never ever are able to confirm a Supreme Court justice ever again when the president is of a different party than the party that controls the Supreme Court, and you will just forever have Supreme Courts that have 8 justices, 7 justices. That's a really scary prospect, but it's not out of the realm of possibility if we don't fix this. Yeah, no thanks.
Use a drink.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for the manufacturing world, I mentioned that there is lots of good news there as well. And let me just talk a little bit about in the manufacturing sector what we're doing to try to incentivize more private sector work coming to the state. The only reason that more private sector aerospace work won't come to Connecticut, and this isn't just about the Geared turbofan, this is about a lot of suppliers in the state who do work for other aerospace companies outside of the engine business, is workforce. We have an aging manufacturing workforce. We have lots of vacancies in our manufacturers today. And when you talk to prime contractors, OEMs, who want to put work in Connecticut, they absolutely have a concern about cost. But they also have a concern about capacity. And so we are working hard at the federal level in bringing workforce development dollars to the state. We've had 2 big announcements. One, an announcement to build out more advanced manufacturing training centers at our community colleges. Another to do a pipeline of manufacturing employment in eastern Connecticut that we hope is going to satisfy that demand over time. Let me just totally change subjects and talk about something else outside of the manufacturing world. So 95% of the jobs that have been created in Connecticut since the recession have actually not been at the big companies, they've been at the small companies. And we have in the New Haven and Middlesex sort of area a burgeoning startup and biotech economy that is really exciting. In about an hour, a number of us are going to be in New Haven at the grand opening of the new Alexion pharmaceutical building, which is going to be a landmark anchor tenant in New Haven, which frankly has tentacles that spread into Middlesex County, up into Middletown, that are going to attract thousands more biotech and startup companies to Connecticut. But when you talk about startup economies, you need 3 things. You need human and intellectual capital, you need financial capital, and then you need management capacity, you need management talent. If you look at the 3 things that make a Silicon Valley, that make a Boston and an I-126 corridor, it's those 3 things. And so we undoubtedly have the intellectual capital at Yale, at Wesleyan. We don't have the financial capital because we've got a lot of private equity firms and hedge funds and not enough venture firms. And we're beginning to get the management capital because we have these big firms that are locating here. Jackson Labs brings 100 managers with them. Alexian brings a couple dozen managers with them. So I'm going to continue to sort of invest in how we support that triumvirate that you need, and continue to work with the governor to try to recruit some more big anchor tenants, because those big anchor tenants bring with them the management talent that then can go move to startups as well. The $2 billion additional investment in NIH funding will be really important for us in Connecticut. We get a much bigger share of that NIH funding at places like Wesleyan and at Yale than other states do. So NIH funding is really important to that agenda as well. So those are two of the things that we're going to continue to do here. Invest in that startup economy. Take a look at a couple bills that I have that I'm sort of the leader in the Senate on supporting angel investors. I've got an angel investor tax credit bill, another bill that helps small businesses link up with angel investors, and then take a look at the work we're doing on workforce development. That's important as well. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mitch.
In closing, our next breakfast, as Chris mentioned, is the 14th of March with Gino Arayama, so mark that down. I'm just going to close today with a statement from Medea. I hope we all can leave and listen to this. I won't allow myself to feel uncomfortable wearing my headscarf on campus, and no one has ever imposed their will on mine. Even as I realize that UConn is a safe haven for me, I know that I'll have to leave it soon to face the real world of jobs and adult worries. My hope is that once I do step out of the safety net and blazing with a UConn Husky, I will still be understood to be as American as everyone else. And you will recognize me by my blue and white sweater and my smile. Have a great day. The sun always shines in Middlesex County.